The emergency alert bounced across 17 relay stations, reaching every human military installation, outpost, and vessel in range. Elena watched the confirmation pings flooding her console, each one representing a ship captain receiving the distress coordinates. Protocol dictated she should wait for official authorization, but protocol had been written by species who evolved on gentle worlds where hesitation rarely meant death. Commander Vasquez, explain yourself. The Vanth administrator's voice had shifted from concerned to coldly furious. You've activated a Class 1 military alert without proper authorization. The diplomatic consequences are less important than a genocide in progress. Elena finished, turning to face him directly. She'd served under Administrator Length for 3 years and respected his dedication to procedure, but the fundamental difference between them had never been so apparent. The Vanth evolved on a temperate world with predictable seasons and few natural predators, viewed careful deliberation as the hallmark of intelligence. Humans knew better. On Earth, hesitation meant death, whether from predators, natural disasters, or the countless wars that had shaped their species. Administrator, I take full responsibility, she continued, her voice steady as she brought up the sensor readings. The signal matches Thalassy communication patterns, and orbital scans show multiple explosions consistent with planetary bombardment. The colony has a population of approximately 3.2 million, primarily civilian researchers and their families. The administrator's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of distress. Even if your assessment is correct, there are proper channels. The Consortium Emergency Committee must. Takes an average of 7 days to convene. Elena interrupted, pulling up the historical response data she'd memorized during her training. The Voleri settlement on Praxis IV sent 12 distress calls over 9 days, while the committee debated jurisdiction. 800,000 died waiting for help that arrived too late. She watched understanding dawn in the administrator's expression. Not agreement, but comprehension of her human reasoning. The office doors slid open as more station personnel arrived, drawn by the alert. The fleet won't wait for approval, Elena said, softer now. Captain Wei has primary command authority once the ERP is initiated. I'm transmitting all data we have on the attackers. Her fingers flew across the interface, compiling sensor readings, signal analysis, and preliminary tactical assessments. The Thalassy are aquatic bioengineers with minimal defense technology. Whoever's attacking them has substantial firepower and almost certainly numerical superiority. On her screen, the first official acknowledgement appeared. The HSV Indomitable, Admiral Wei's flagship, had received the alert and was preparing for immediate departure from Arcturus Station. Confirmation messages cascaded below it as vessels across human space responded. You've started a war, the administrator whispered. Elena's expression remained calm, but her eyes hardened. No, sir. Someone else started it. We're just making sure they regret that decision. She turned back to her station, establishing a direct quantum link to Admiral Wei's tactical systems. The consortium might view humans as dangerously impulsive, but they misunderstood the nature of human decision-making. Evolution on a death world hadn't made them reckless. It had simply compressed their risk assessment calculations, allowing them to process threat scenarios and response options with an efficiency that appeared instinctive to outside observers. Commander, Wei's voice came through her earpiece. Initial fleet elements will reach Thalassy space in approximately 47 hours. The Pathfinder can be there in 16. Confirmed dispatch authorization. Elena didn't hesitate. Confirmed, Admiral. The Pathfinder is our fastest scout vessel, with Captain O'Cuffer commanding. She'll provide initial assessment and survivor reassurance until the primary response force arrives. As she coordinated the gathering armada, Elena caught the administrator watching her with an unreadable expression, something between fear and reluctant admiration. You truly believe this is the right course of action? He asked quietly. I do, Elena replied. Because there's one lesson every human learns growing up on Earth. Administrator, When disaster strikes, survival often depends on who reaches you first. She looked up at the tactical display, where hundreds of human vessels were already plotting intercept courses to the Thalassy colony. Today, we're making sure it's us. Admiral Jackson Y placed the birthday cake knife carefully on the table, his family falling silent as they recognized the focused look in his eyes. His neural implant projected tactical data directly into his visual field, the Thalassy colony coordinates, preliminary threat assessment, and the cascading activation of human vessels across 17 systems. Duty calls, his daughter Mai asked, already knowing the answer. 3 generations of the Y family had served in Earth's defense forces before humanity reached the stars. They understood what it meant when the neural alert pulsed. The Thalassy colony in the Vega Proxima sector, he confirmed, his mind already processing response scenarios. Unknown hostiles, orbital bombardment in progress. He kissed his grandson's forehead. I'm sorry, little one. We'll celebrate properly when I return. The boy looked up with solemn understanding beyond his 7 years. Are you going to help people, grandfather? Yes, Wei replied simply. People who need us very badly. As Wei left the celebration, his command protocols transformed his civilian transport into a mobile tactical center, holographic displays materializing around him as he established quantum-linked communications with his flagship. HSV Indomitable preparing for immediate departure, Admiral, reported his executive officer, Commander Reyes. All crew recalled and reporting at 94% strength. Engineering estimates full combat readiness in 17 minutes. Acceptable. Wei acknowledged, reviewing the force deployment data streaming in. 573 human vessels had received the ERP signal, a mixture of dedicated military ships and dual-purpose vessels that could rapidly convert from scientific or exploratory functions to combat operations. The consortium had never truly understood humanity's insistence on maintaining what they viewed as an excessive defense capacity. After joining the interstellar community, humans had discovered that most advanced species had abandoned warfare centuries before achieving faster-than-light travel, viewing military preparedness as a sign of cultural immaturity. Humanity had tried to explain, repeatedly, that their caution stemmed not from aggression, but from hard-earned survival lessons. Earth's history was written in the blood of those who had failed to prepare for threats they couldn't imagine. When the consortium remained skeptical, humans had found a compromise, repurposing their military vessels for exploration and scientific endeavors while maintaining their defensive capabilities. What appeared to most consortium species as stubborn militarism was simply the pragmatic foresight of a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times before learning that peace required both goodwill and strength. Wei's transport docked with the Indomitable 26 minutes after he received the alert. The crew stood at attention as he strode onto the bridge, taking his position at the command center. Status report, he ordered, interfacing directly with the ship's tactical systems. Hyperdrive spooling at maximum capacity, Admiral. Weapon systems online. Shield generators at 97% efficiency and rising, reported his tactical officer. We've received update packets from Commander Vasquez at Outpost Sentinel. The distress signal contains fragments of sensor data showing at least 3 vessels of unknown configuration bombarding Thalassy population centers. Why process this information as the massive engines of the Indomitable hummed to life? Around them, 11 other vessels broke formation from Arcturus Station's docking arrays, their captains already coordinating approach vectors through the tactical network. The scout vessel Pathfinder will reach the colony approximately 31 hours before our arrival, Wei noted, reviewing Captain Okafor's deployment trajectory. She'll provide initial assessment and survivor support, but will be severely outgunned if she engages. His communications officer looked up from her station. Sir, Captain Okafor's last transmission indicated she intends to engage regardless of the tactical situation. Wei's expression remained neutral, but a hint of pride touched his eyes. Of course she does. She wouldn't be human if she didn't. He turned to the navigational officer. Plot the fastest possible course To the Thalassy colony, Lieutenant. Inform all vessels in the primary response group to prepare for combat operations immediately upon arrival. As the Indomitable broke orbit, Y received confirmed departure notices from vessels across human space, research ships abandoning scientific missions, colony support vessels leaving construction projects, even civilian transports with retrofitted defense systems joining the mobilization. The Quarian ambassador's protest came through on the diplomatic channel, his translator struggling to convey his agitation. Admiral Wei, the Consortium Council has not authorized this military deployment. You risk diplomatic incidents of the highest order. Wei's response was measured but firm. Ambassador, with respect, Consortium law permits emergency response to verify distress signals. We are simply exercising that right with appropriate urgency. But such a massive deployment is proportional to the threat. Wei interrupted. When the Thalassy are safe, we can debate the finer points of diplomatic protocol. Until then, we have work to do. He closed the channel and turned to his crew. Prepare for hyperjump. We have people counting on us. Captain Amara Okafer's hands remained steady on the Pathfinder's controls, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The journey from the outer relay station to the Thalassy colony had pushed her ship's hyperdrives beyond recommended tolerances, the engineering crew working in shifts to prevent catastrophic failure. As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Thalassy system, the sensor arrays immediately registered the devastation. Multiple orbital habitats destroyed, reported her science officer, Lieutenant Kato. Debris field consistent with systematic weapons fire rather than accidental destruction. Atmosphere shows particulate contamination consistent with large-scale bombardment. Okafor absorbed this information with the calm efficiency that had defined her career. Born in the underwater habitats of Europa, she had grown up where equipment failures and split-second decisions determined survival. The crushing pressure of ocean and ice had shaped her people into precise, methodical problem solvers who calculated risks down to decimal points, yet acted without hesitation when necessary. Life sign readings, she asked, bringing the Pathfinder closer to the Azure planet. Scattered but substantial, Kaito confirmed. Approximately 70% of expected population readings, concentrated in underwater habitats and coastal facilities. The Thalassy aquatic nature likely provided some protection against orbital bombardment. Relief flickered briefly in Okafor's eyes before her tactical officer interrupted. Captain, sensors detect 3 vessels of unknown configuration bombarding the Northern Continental Research Center. Energy signatures suggest weapons systems significantly more advanced than Consortium standard. The Consortium First Contact Protocol was clear. Observe, report, await instructions. Human protocol, shaped by thousands of years of responding to disasters, both natural and self-inflicted, prioritized immediate intervention and survivor reassurance. Open all communication channels, Okafor ordered, her decision already made. This is Captain Okafor of the Human Systems Vessel Pathfinder responding to emergency signal. We come to render aid. Reinforcements are inbound. She watched the scanner as the unknown vessels ceased their bombardment, their energy signatures shifting as weapon systems reoriented toward her ship. The response came not as words but as targeting locks engaging on the Pathfinder's hull. Unknown vessels, this is your final warning. Okafor transmitted, knowing the diplomatic attempt would likely fail, but obligated to try. Power down weapons or I will be forced to defend myself. The first energy blast struck the Pathfinder's shields with enough force to throw several crew members against their restraints. Warning indicators flashed across Okafor's console as the second and third blasts followed in quick succession. Shields at 63% and dropping, reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Clark. Their weapons technology exceeds our defensive capabilities by approximately 27%. Most species would consider a lone scout ship against 3 warships a death sentence, but humans had survived on Earth precisely because they refused to accept no-win scenarios. In the crushing pressure of Europa's underwater colonies, Okafor had learned that creativity often meant the difference between life and death. "Execute Maneuver Theta 7, she ordered, her voice deadly calm as her hands danced across the controls. The Pathfinder's engine screamed as the ship performed an impossible turn, diving toward rather than away from the attacking vessels. "Captain," her selfie communications officer gasped, his four eyes widening as another hit rocked the ship. "Getting inside their defense perimeter," Okafor explained, executing a maneuver that sent them skimming along the largest enemy vessel's hull, and telling everyone exactly what we're facing. As they executed the high-risk flyby, her tactical officer deployed specialized drones disguised as debris. Not weapons, humanity had promised to limit offensive capabilities on scout vessels, but advanced transmitters that attached themselves to the enemy hulls, broadcasting the attackers' positions, shield frequencies, and weapon capabilities to every inbound human vessel. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported Clark as another hit sent tremors through the ship. "Automatic seals engage. Engineering reports coolant leak in the port nacelle." Okafor nodded, adjusting their trajectory to put a small moon between them and the attackers. "Establish communication with any Thalassy survivors you can reach." Moments later, a wavering hologram appeared on the bridge. A Thalassy elder, her translucent skin showing the stress patterns of extreme fear. "This is Captain Okafor," she said to the frightened alien. "Hold position. The Deathworlders are coming." "Our cities are burning," came the faint reply. "They're methodically destroying everything. Research centers first, then population hubs." "Not anymore," Okafor promised as her damaged ship limped behind the moon, emergency systems screaming warnings. "They're about to learn why the consortium counsels against attacking anyone under human protection." As the Pathfinder's automated repair systems engage, Okafor reviewed the data they'd gathered. The attackers possessed technology beyond current consortium military standards, but their tactics revealed a rigidity that suggested over-reliance on technological superiority rather than adaptive combat doctrine. "They've never faced humans before," she murmured, a grim smile forming on her lips. "That's about to become a serious problem for them." Admiral Way studied the tactical display with unwavering focus as data streamed in from Captain Okafor's drones. The Pathfinder had suffered significant damage, but had accomplished its primary mission, providing detailed intelligence on the enemy forces and establishing contact with Thalassy survivors. Way's mind processed the information with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades planning for contingencies that most consortium species considered unnecessarily pessimistic. "The attackers have been identified as the Krev Dominion through pattern matching with fringe intelligence reports," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Rivera. 17 vessels now in orbit around the Thalassy homeworld, arranged in a standard blockade formation. Their technology exceeds consortium military standards by approximately 30%. Way's expression remained impassive as he studied the enemy formation projected above the command table. And yet they follow a predictable geometrical defensive pattern. Over-reliance on technological superiority often leads to tactical rigidity. His executive officer, Commander Reyes, nodded in agreement. "They've never encountered humans before. Their historical conquest pattern shows they typically face minimal resistance. Most fringe worlds lack significant defensive capabilities." "Then today will be educational for them," Way replied, finalizing the battle plan he'd been developing since receiving Okafor's data. "Signal the Vanguard fleet. Execute Battle Doctrine 147. Distributed asymmetrical engagement." 27 human vessels dropped out of hyperspace precisely 37 minutes after Okafor's initial engagement, appearing in what looked like a chaotic, scattered formation. To most consortium tacticians, it would have appeared as a coordination failure, ships emerging at seemingly random coordinates rather than in organized battle groups. To Way, it was the deliberate implementation of a combat doctrine, evolved from centuries of warfare on Earth, refined through countless simulations of potential extraterrestrial conflicts. The apparently disorganized deployment was designed specifically to counter the rigid, geometrical formations favored by technologically superior opponents. Epsilon Squadron, taking heavy fire, reported his communications officer as the first engagement began. Shields at 27% and dropping. Order them to execute chain maneuver and fall back to position Delta. Wei commanded calmly, watching as 3 human corvettes deliberately took hits to create an opening for a specialized EMP burst that temporarily disabled 2 Krev vessels. The resulting battle bore little resemblance to the elegant distanced engagements described in consortium historical records. Human ships executed high-velocity, point-blank attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously, accepting calculated damage to create tactical advantages. Where consortium doctrine emphasized preserving forces through cautious engagement, humanity had learned through its bloody history that sometimes victory required sacrifice. Medical frigate Mercy reports first Thalassa refugees successfully evacuated from the northern continent, his communications officer announced. Captain Chen requests additional support for the southern evacuation corridors. Wei redirected 3 vessels to reinforce the evacuation efforts, watching as the battle unfolded across his tactical display. 3 human vessels had already suffered critical damage, their crews evacuating in survival pods that smaller, faster ships scooped up mid-battle while continuing to fire. "Sir, the Krev commander is hailing us," his communications officer reported with surprise. Wei nodded. On screen, the alien that appeared on the central display had an unsettling resemblance to Earth's extinct theropod predators. Scaled skin over an angular face, vertical pupils and amber eyes, and a mouth filled with serrated teeth. When it spoke, the translation software rendered its clicks and growls into fluid standard. "Your vessels are inferior. Your technology is outdated. Retreat now, and you may survive." Wei studied the alien commander without responding immediately, his mind calculating probabilities and outcomes with the speed that had made him the youngest admiral in human history. Behind him, the bridge crew continued their duties, coordinating the battle with disciplined efficiency. "You misunderstand the situation," Wei finally replied, his voice calm and measured as he transmitted a tactical overlay showing the trajectories of 400 additional human ships converging on their position. "This isn't our first wave," he continued, allowing himself the smallest of smiles. "It's our scouting party." The Krev commander's vertical pupils dilated slightly, a reaction Wei noted and filed away for future reference. The alien ended the transmission without response, but Wei observed a subtle shift in the Krev formation as several vessels repositioned to defensive orientations. "They're preparing for our main force," Rise noted. Wei nodded, a logical response, but insufficient. "They're still thinking in terms of conventional fleet engagements." He turned to his communications officer. "Signal all vessels, prepare to implement Phase 2. And inform Captain Okafor that her performance was exemplary. The Pathfinder's data has saved countless lives today." As the first wave of human vessels continued their engagement with the Krev forces, Wei felt a familiar calm settle over him. The focused clarity that came from confronting a dangerous but not unbeatable opponent. The Krev had superior technology and numbers, but they lacked what humanity had developed through millennia of continuous warfare and survival against impossible odds. Adaptability in the face of changing circumstances, and the willingness to pay any price to protect others. For the Thalassa, he murmured to himself as the main human fleet prepared to arrive, "Today's price will be worth paying." Fleet Commander Zhao of the Krev Dominion had conquered 14 systems before reaching Thalassa space, each following the same efficient pattern: overwhelming force against isolated colonies, communication blockades to prevent distress calls, and methodical subjugation. No species had ever mounted an effective resistance, much less responded with a full military mobilization to a partially corrupted distress signal. "Report," he demanded as the bridge of his command vessel shuddered from another near miss. His intelligence officer's scales had paled slightly, a physiological response to stress that Krev military training typically eliminated. The humans are classified as Deathworlders within the consortium. Their homeworld has 1.3 times standard gravity, atmospheric composition that would be toxic to most species, temperature variations that would kill most oxygen breathers, and evolutionary pressure from thousands of predator species. Zhao had dismissed these concerns initially, confident in Krev technological superiority. That confidence evaporated as the main human fleet arrived not as a unified force, but in tactical clusters specifically configured to counter Krev advantages. They're not following any recognizable doctrine, his tactical officer reported, frustrated as another Krev formation was disrupted by fighters executing maneuvers that their targeting computers couldn't predict. Their attack patterns appear almost improvisational. The battle had expanded across the entire Thalassa system as human vessels employed maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart. What Zhao couldn't comprehend was that humans had evolved on a world where daily survival required anticipating catastrophe. Their vessels weren't built to ideal specifications, but to withstand cascading failures while continuing to function. Central Command, this is Defense Group 7. Came a transmission from one of his subordinate commanders. We're tracking multiple small craft approaching our position. Request targeting assistance. Zhao watched in disbelief as his sensor officer magnified the image. The craft were impossibly small, single-pilot fighters moving with a coordination that defied prediction algorithms. The consortium had abandoned fighter craft centuries ago, replacing them with automated drones, but humans insisted on putting pilots in their smallest combat vessels. Their neural response times shouldn't allow for such precision. His science officer muttered, watching as a squadron of human fighters wove through point defense fire that would have destroyed any automated system. It's almost as if they're anticipating our targeting patterns. They are, Zhao realized suddenly. Their pilots are making micro-corrections based on observed firing patterns. He had studied weapon systems long enough to recognize the implications. Their reaction time is impossible. His tactical officer finished, voice hollow as they watched a human fighter absorb damage that should have destroyed it. The pilot somehow maintaining control long enough to complete its attack run. Most disturbing was the apparent disregard humans showed for their own safety, executing maneuvers with minimal survival margins that Krev pilots would never attempt. It wasn't recklessness, Zhao gradually realized, but a fundamentally different calculation of acceptable risk. The psychology of a species accustomed to facing death daily for countless generations. New contact emerging from hyperspace, his sensor officer reported. Massive energy signature. It's a carrier vessel. Zhao had read about carrier tactics in historical archives, a concept abandoned by most spacefaring civilizations as inefficient compared to self-contained warships. The human vessel that emerged was unlike anything in Krev tactical databases, not the largest ship they'd encountered, but designed with a singular purpose that became immediately apparent as launch bays opened along its hull. They're deploying more fighters, his tactical officer said, voice tinged with disbelief. Hundreds of them. As the swarm of human fighters approached, Zhao observed something that fundamentally challenged Krev military doctrine. The smaller craft weren't following preset attack patterns but seemed to be improvising in real time, adapting to each defensive measure almost instantly. When one tactic failed, they immediately switched to another, probing for weaknesses with an intuitive understanding that no combat AI had ever replicated. Order all vessels to Titan formation, Zhao commanded, recognizing the dangerous vulnerability human fighters presented to ships designed for large-scale engagements. Overlapping shields, concentrate point defense fire. But even as he gave the order, he watched 3 human capital ships exploit the resulting concentration, their weapons targeting the precisely calculated weak points in the overlapping shield harmonics. It was as if they had anticipated his response and planned for it. How are they coordinating this? He demanded of no one in particular, watching as human vessels operated with a unified purpose, despite their seemingly chaotic deployment. His science officer looked up from his analysis with an expression Zhao had never seen on a Krev face before, something approaching awe. I believe, Commander, we're witnessing what humans call intuitive tactical adaptation. Their historical records suggest they evolved this capacity through millennia of intraspecies warfare. Zhao watched the battle unfold with growing comprehension. The Krev had achieved dominance through technological superiority and rigid adherence to proven doctrine. They were facing a species that had evolved through ceaseless conflict, for whom adaptation wasn't just a military concept, but a biological imperative. "We're not just fighting their vessels," he said quietly. "We're fighting their entire evolutionary history." 7 days into the conflict, the battle had reached a precarious equilibrium. The human fleet had prevented the Krev from landing additional ground forces on the Thalassic colony and evacuated 60% of the population, but the Krev's technological advantage was taking a mounting toll. Despite rotating vessels to maintain constant pressure, Admiral Wei faced diminishing resources and casualty reports that grew longer by the hour. "Containment is successful but unsustainable," Commander Ray is summarized during their tactical briefing. "At current attrition rates, we'll be forced to withdraw within 72 hours, leaving the remaining Thalasi vulnerable." Wei nodded, his expression revealing nothing of the weight he carried. "Then we need to change the parameters of this engagement. Conventional tactics won't achieve victory against their technological edge." The turning point came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Maya Patel, a xenolinguist serving aboard the medical frigate HSV Mercy, had been treating Thalasi survivors while analyzing intercepted Krev communications. As a specialist in cultural linguistic analysis, she'd been assigned to extract tactical information, but her attention caught on recurring phrases that seemed ritualistic rather than strategic. "Admiral," she reported via secure channel, bypassing the chain of command with the urgency of her discovery. "The Krev aren't just fighting for conquest. Their communications contain repeated religious references suggesting they believe they're fulfilling the divine mandate." Wei's attention sharpened immediately. "Explain." "Their commander repeatedly references the Great Cleansing and removal of the unworthy as divine imperatives," Patel continued. "I've been working with the Thalasi linguists to cross-reference these terms against fringe intelligence reports. The Krev appear to follow a religion that categorizes species according to their perceived evolutionary worthiness, with aquatic species like the Thalasi considered particularly aberrant. This insight gave Wei a strategy that no consortium species would likely have considered: psychological warfare. Humans, having survived millennia of ideological conflicts on Earth, understood how to combat faith-driven aggression better than any species in known space. "Dr. Patel, I need everything you can give me on their religious framework," Wei ordered. "Priority access to all intelligence resources." Within hours, Wei convened a specialized task force comprising human intelligence specialists, Thalasi cultural experts, and the few consortium xenotheologists who had studied fringe civilizations. What emerged was a daring strategy that human military historians would later compare to psychological operations from Earth's most sophisticated conflicts. "It's cultural manipulation," protested the consortium observer aboard Wei's flagship when the plan was presented. "It violates multiple ethical protocols regarding interference with belief systems." "We're not the consortium," Wei replied, his voice level but resolute. "We're humans responding to an imminent threat against innocence. We save lives first and file ethics paperwork later." The operation required direct access to Krev religious texts and command protocols, information that couldn't be gleaned from intercepted communications alone. Wei organized what consortium military strategists would have considered insane. Sending a small team led by Commander Vasquez onto the Krev command vessel using experimental quantum tunneling technology with a 40% projected survival rate. "This is beyond acceptable risk parameters," the consortium observer argued. "The technology isn't proven stable for organic transport." "I volunteered, sir," Vasquez replied simply, as did everyone on the team. Wei met her eyes across the briefing table, recognizing the calm determination he'd seen countless times in human operatives willing to risk everything for a mission they believed in. The consortium had never understood this aspect of humanity. Their calculations of acceptable risk failed to account for the human willingness to face near-certain death when the alternative was watching others suffer. The mission is approved, Wei declared. Proceed with final preparations. 12 hours later, Vasquez's team made the quantum jump aboard a specially modified shuttle. Only specialized sensors detected the momentary energy fluctuation as the human operatives materialized inside the Krev vessel's maintenance corridors. Infiltration successful, came Vasquez's whispered confirmation over a tightly encrypted channel. Proceeding to primary objective. Wei returned to the tactical display, monitoring the ongoing battle while part of his mind remained with the infiltration team. The operation succeeded at great cost. Half the team lost, but Vasquez, returning with the intelligence they desperately needed. As she was treated for her injuries in the medical bay, Vasquez handed Wei a quantum storage device containing complete copies of the Krev religious codex and command protocols. How did you infiltrate their command deck without being detected? Wei asked, the question burning in everyone's mind. Vasquez's grim smile revealed the pragmatic brutality that humans tried to keep hidden from their more peaceful consortium allies. I grew up in a Brazilian favela. Admiral. Nobody notices maintenance workers and cleaning staff, not even aliens with superior technology. Within hours, human communication specialists worked with Thalassa linguists to craft modified versions of Krev religious doctrines, specifically passages suggesting that attacking defenseless species was a sacrilege that would condemn the attackers' souls to eternal torment. The psychological warfare began with a system-wide broadcast on frequencies used by Krev military chaplains, containing what appeared to be discovered sections of their own sacred texts that specifically prohibited the destruction of water-dwelling sentients as vessels of divine knowledge. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. 3 Krev vessels broke formation within hours of the broadcast, their crews apparently in theological crisis. Others maintained position, but ceased offensive operations as communications channels filled with heated religious debates between Krev commanders. As human resources stretched thin maintaining the defensive perimeter, Admiral Wei received an unexpected alert from his sensor officer. Sir, multiple vessels approaching from the Galactic North. Configuration unknown, but they're not using Krev propulsion signatures. Wei tensed, preparing to redistribute his remaining forces to meet this new threat, until his communications officer's expression shifted from concern to astonishment. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the approaching vessels. They're consortium ships. The first communication came from a Volrani medical vessel, a species known for their cautious neutrality in all conflicts. HSV Indomitable. This is the Volrani Vessel Healer's Oath. The Consortium Council officially disapproves of unauthorized military action, but we are not here as representatives of the Consortium. We watched your people willingly sacrifice yourselves for a species you barely know. We have come as individuals who can no longer stand aside. Wei's bridge fell silent as the sensor display updated to show vessels from 17 different Consortium species approaching the conflict zone. These weren't military ships. The Consortium had largely demilitarized centuries before humans achieved interstellar travel, but civilian vessels repurposed and volunteering to assist. I don't understand, the Consortium observer whispered, watching as ships from species that had consistently voted against human military initiatives now placed themselves alongside the human fleet. The Council explicitly prohibited involvement. Commander Rice smiled slightly. They're not following Council orders. They're following their conscience. What followed transformed the nature of the conflict. While human vessels maintained combat operations, these Consortium ships brought specialized functions their civilizations had perfected over millennia of peaceful development. Volrani vessels with regenerative technologies that could heal injuries human medicine considered fatal. Meridian ships with matter synthesis capabilities to repair damaged vessels in hours rather than weeks. Ancient Orc scouts with sensor systems that penetrated Krev stealth technology, and even the reclusive Duvari, whose unique understanding of gravitational physics allowed them to create micro-singularities that disrupted Krev targeting systems. "We never anticipated this," Wei admitted quietly to Reyes as they watched a heavily damaged human destroyer dock with a Meridian synthesis ship, repair drones swarming over its hull. The consortium species always seemed so reluctant to embrace conflict. Perhaps they needed to see that there's a difference between embracing conflict and accepting its necessity, Reyes suggested. You can abhor violence while still recognizing when it's required to protect others. Most surprising was the arrival of the Thalassa themselves, not as victims to be rescued, but as active participants in their own defense. Their scientists, working aboard human vessels, apply their advanced knowledge of fluid dynamics to develop countermeasures against Krev shield harmonics. "We analyzed the energy dispersal patterns through hydrological modeling," explained the Thalassa chief scientist, her translucent skin revealing the complex neural pathways of her species. "Water teaches us that rigid barriers always fail against persistent pressure finding the path of least resistance." The resulting alliance was unprecedented in consortium history, humanity's combat expertise providing the defensive framework for the specialized technologies of peaceful civilizations, now committed to a shared cause. The Krev, already destabilized by the psychological warfare campaign, found themselves facing not just human military ingenuity, but the full technological diversity of the consortium applied in ways they had never encountered. During a brief respite between engagements, a Morrigan diplomat, a species known for their 1,000-year neutrality, approached Commander Vasquez on the observation deck of the HSV Indomitable. "We always feared humanity's warrior nature," the Morrigan admitted, their crystalline form refracting light as they spoke. "We never considered it might be necessary someday." Vasquez watched a damaged human cruiser limping back to the repair docks, its hull scarred from taking fire meant for a Thalassa refugee transport. Through the viewport, she could see Volrani healers working alongside human medics, treating wounded from a dozen species. "The universe is vast and often dangerous," she replied, her voice softer than usual. "Peace is always preferable, but peace requires defenders willing to bleed when necessary." The Morrigan's crystalline structure shifted, and what Vasquez had learned was their equivalent of thoughtful contemplation. "Your species has always confused us. You create such beautiful art and music, yet maintain military capabilities we considered primitive and unnecessary. You speak of peace while preparing for war." "Because we learned the hard way that hoping for peace isn't enough," Vasquez explained. "On Earth, those who couldn't defend themselves rarely survived to shape the future. We carry that lesson in our DNA." As she spoke, tactical updates streamed to her neural implant. The combined fleet was pushing the Krev back from the Thalassa homeworld, their religious confusion compounded by their inability to counter the diverse technology suddenly deployed against them. "I believe we've misjudged your species," the Morrigan said finally. "What we interpreted as aggression was perhaps wisdom we hadn't yet needed to learn." 14 days after the initial distress call, the Krev Dominion fleet withdrew from Thalassa space. Their retreat wasn't merely tactical, but accompanied by a formal communication addressed to the Deathworlders and their allies, proposing terms for a permanent cessation of hostilities and establishing boundaries for their respective territories. Admiral Wei, alongside representatives from the volunteer consortium vessels and the Thalassa leadership, convened aboard the HSV Indomitable to consider the proposal. The conference chamber, hastily converted from a tactical briefing room, held the most diverse gathering of species ever assembled outside an official consortium function. Their offering complete withdrawal from Thalassa space and a non-aggression pact, summarized Captain Chen, her arm still in a regenerative cast after her ship took critical damage, saving a Thalassa habitat. But they make no commitments regarding other systems beyond consortium borders. The discussion highlighted the profound philosophical differences between humanity and other consortium species. Where many counseled immediate acceptance to end the conflict, the human representatives argued for guarantees to protect other vulnerable systems that might still face Krev aggression. "The proposed terms secure our immediate objective," noted the Volrani medical director, his iridescent scales shifting in the chamber's light. The Thalassy are safe. Further demands risk renewed conflict. And what about the next world they target? Captain Okafor countered, her voice steady despite the still healing wounds from the Pathfinder's initial engagement. Do we wait for another desperate SOS before acting? The Thalassy elder, her age evident in the cloudy translucence of her skin, raised a webbed hand for attention. The chamber quieted immediately. We have studied human history since they joined the consortium, she said, her translator conveying the melodic cadence of her aquatic language. They have fought more wars than all our species combined, yet they were the first to answer our call when war found us. Perhaps we should listen to those who understand conflict well enough to end it permanently. Her words shifted the discussion. Even the most peace-oriented representatives recognized the wisdom in securing a lasting resolution rather than a temporary reprieve. The final agreement incorporated elements from both approaches. A demilitarized buffer zone would be established, monitored by a coalition force, including human and volunteer consortium vessels, while diplomatic channels would be open to integrate the Krev into wider interstellar law with special provisions addressing their religious concerns about cultural contamination. As the human fleet stood down from combat operations, something unprecedented occurred within consortium politics. The Council, which had initially condemned humanity's reckless intervention, found themselves facing a unified petition from 23 member species. The formal establishment of a rapid response force, based on the human model, but incorporating the diverse capabilities of all participating civilizations. Commander Elena Vasquez, who had first received the distress call at Outpost Sentinel, was invited to address the consortium assembly. Her speech was characteristically brief. Humans were known for directness rather than diplomatic flourish. For centuries, you've called us Dithworlders, as if our origin was something to overcome or hide, she said, standing before representatives of 200 species. Today, I stand before you proud of what our harsh world taught us, that when someone calls for help, you move heaven and earth to answer. That lesson is not unique to Earth. It exists within all of you. Perhaps we simply needed to demonstrate it was possible. The Earth delegate later pulled her aside, his expression troubled. The consortium is concerned about the precedent we've set. They fear we've militarized peaceful species. Vasquez watched a group of Thalassy scientists deep in conversation with human engineers, already designing hybrid vessels that combine their technologies. We haven't militarized them. We've awakened something that was always there, the understanding that true peace isn't passive. It requires those willing to defend it. The Dithworlder fleet was formally disbanded 3 months later, replaced by the Consortium Emergency Response Force. But throughout known space, the reputation of humanity was forever changed. They remained Dithworlders. But the term had transformed from one of mild concern to one of profound respect. When the next distress call came from a distant system, humans weren't the only ones who answered immediately. The Deathworlders had taught the galaxy that compassion without action was merely sentiment, and that sometimes salvation came from those evolutionary crucibles that forged not just strength, but the will to use it for others. In the observation lounge of the newly commissioned CERF vessel Unity, Admiral Wei stood beside Commander Vasquez, watching the diverse crew of humans and consortium species preparing for their first official deployment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you followed protocol?" Wei asked quietly. "If you'd filed the distress call and waited for committee approval?" Vasquez shook her head, her gaze on the stars beyond the viewport. "No, sir. Some questions don't need answering." As the Unity's engines hummed to life, its mission clear and its crew united by purpose rather than species, Wei thought perhaps humanity had finally found its true role in the cosmos, not as conquerors or even explorers, but as guardians who understood that the most precious things in existence were often the most vulnerable. "For the Thalassy," he murmured, echoing the words he'd spoken during the battle's darkest hours, "it was worth it." Vasquez nodded. "For all of them, sir. For all of them."